All right.
Okay,
Hello,
I think we are live now. All right, so hello everyone. Welcome to the Living Art Collaborative and WashU EEPB seminar series. And so my name is Yisan Yang, and I am one of this year's new LEC postdocs. And so it is my immense pleasure today to introduce our speaker this week, Regina Mossotti. Regina is a wildlife biologist by training and has been director of animal care and conservation at the Endangered Wolf Center for almost 10 years. And she is also currently the vice coordinator of the AZA American Wolf Species Survival Plan. And she's also on the management team for Mexican Wolf Species Survival Plan. She's also the full supervisor for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Species Survival Plan. So she has been, Regina has been working with both captive and wild carnivores for over 16 years, including some very fascinating experience and projects like capturing, coloring mountain lions in California, and also being part of the Yellowstone Wolf Project. So I'm very excited to hear her talk today. And so the title of her talk today is Innovative Conservation for Mexican Wolf, Pups to the Wild. And so if you have any questions or comments for Regina, please leave a message in the live chat and we will read it out at the end of the talk. And so with that, I will mute myself and give the mic to Regina.
Well, thank you for that very nice introduction. I will go ahead and share my screen. Oh. It will. Oh. No, won't do it. I just really want you to see this video, huh? Let me fix that. Of course, right off the bat, technical difficulties. All right. So are you guys seeing the video or are you seeing the beginning slide? For some reason it keeps going to this slide.
We're still seeing that. There you go. Well, we're seeing it now. Yep.
Yeah, we'll just go backwards instead that way. So as Yisan said, I work at the Endangered Wolf Center. I love the big carnivores. They are often misunderstood and misrepresented, and you know, part of my job is being able to advocate for them and share why they are so important and why we need to put efforts towards saving them. So today, specifically, I'm going to talk to you about one of the key species that we work with at the Endangered Wolf Center called the Mexican wolf. And one of the really cool, innovative ways that we were working to save this critically endangered species. But before I get into that, I know Yisan and Brett had mentioned that there are quite a few new people on the talk today that haven't been out to the Endangered Wolf Center or know who we are. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history about us and about wolf conservation, and then I will launch into the fostering program that we're doing. So our center is actually located on Washington University property, Tyson Research Center, and we've been here for about 50 years. And our mission is to preserve and protect large carnivores, and we do that through a multi-pronged approach. We don't just breed and release, we also do research and we do education programs that create awareness. We have found over our almost 50-year history that you can breed animals and release them, and the biology part's actually pretty easy in this case because wolves are great and do what they need to do on the landscape. But if you don't talk to people about the science that shows us why they're so important, we'll still lose habitat. People will still shoot them and fear them. So that's a big part of what we do. As I mentioned, we were founded about 50 years ago by Dr. Marlon Perkins and his wife, Carol. Some of you guys may have heard of Marlon Perkins. He was the host of a TV show, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. If you don't know him, he's essentially the very first Steve Irwin crocodile hunter. He was the first guy on TV bringing wild places and wild animals into people's living rooms and through their television, and getting people to fall in love with animals that were in Africa and Asia and places in North America that people don't usually get to go. So he's been a huge conservationist and a longtime advocate for wildlife and saving wild places. So with his foresight and Carol's foresight, the center has literally helped save 3 species from extinction. Specifically, the American red wolf and the Mexican wolf probably wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for their foresight. And you think about it, as our center was started before the Endangered Species Act was even a thing. So he was really at the beginning stages of understanding ecology and how everything kind of works together, and why wolves especially were such an important species to save. And so we do our work through establishing and maintaining gene pools for endangered species. As we know, genetic diversity can be a key component to making sure that small, reduced populations can stay healthy. We raise animals at our center that in ways that are unique. We've developed husbandry protocols that can help keep animals wild. We don't habituate, pet, talk to, hand feed any of our animals that are Mexican wolves or red wolves, so that we can release them back out into the wild, and they still have that natural fear of people, so that they run away from people. We help with reintroduction, and we do that through working with a lot of our different partners, both NGOs, state, local, federal agencies, different zoological institutions, universities. That we are stronger together, and partnerships are a really big part of our mission. And as I mentioned, we do education programs. A lot of people come to the center and don't even understand why we're needed. Because sometimes I tend to preach to the choir. People that are interested in wolves are like, well, wolves are awesome. Everybody loves wolves, right? That unfortunately used to be the case a long time ago. A lot of ancient civilizations grew up revering the wolf, really mimicking their family style, their loyalty, their hunting abilities. You have different types of folklore that revolve around the wolf and really lift them up as a really neat animal to admire. But unfortunately, that started to change to the mentality that it's a big bad wolf and it's something we need to get rid of. And we did that, humans did that, our culture did that, because we started to change how we looked at and used and were part of the landscape. We changed from hunter-gatherers to a sedentary lifestyle with agriculture and livestock. We started to see wildlife, not just wolves, but wildlife as competition or nuisance because of that. And that led to wolves being hunted for sport. And bounties were introduced that made it a positive reward to hunt wolves. You get money for it. And so this kind of persisted, and those negative perceptions of wolves started to grow, unfortunately. And that led into developing folklores and fairy tales. I'm sure you guys can put in the chat box right now different fairy tales that you guys have heard that have wolves in them. Some of the first ones that come to mind are Three Little Pigs, the Little Red Riding Hood, things that you grow up with from the time that you're 2 years old, where the wolf is the big bad wolf. And what we don't think about is how that changes our subconscious to fear the wolf, even though, nobody's coming out and telling you when you're reading those stories, like, you should hate wolves. But it's basically teaching you that wolves are big and scary, right? Well, it's not just these ancient folklores and fairy tales that do this. We have it still in modern day culture. Frozen, a movie that came out. I'm sure that a lot of you guys probably could sing Let It Go verbatim. But I tell most people that there were bad wolves in Frozen, or scary wolves in Frozen. Most people are like, I don't remember any wolves in Frozen. But sure enough, there was a scene where Anna and Kristoff were going through the woods trying to find her sister, and out of the woods come the wolves chasing them. And what's funny is I tell people that story of that wolves are in Frozen, and like I said, most people don't even realize that they're in there. I actually took my daughter to that film, not knowing there were bad wolves, bad portrayal of wolves, I should say, in the film. And it got to that scene, and it was in the woods, and the ominous music started, and it was dark, and I'm like, oh no, please be anything else but wolves. And sure enough, it was wolves. And I was mad. I wanted to leave. I was like, I'm going to take my 4-year-old out of here. We're not watching this. But the scientist part of my brain clicked, and I decided to watch her and use it as an experiment. I watched her, and my daughter was scared. She thought it was scary. And after the film, we talked about it. I said, hey, what'd you think about the wolves chasing Anna? And her response, I mean, I'll never forget it, was, "Mom, I had no idea wolves are so mean." And so I had to explain to her, like, "Oh, they're just actors. They were just pretending. Wolves aren't really mean. They actually run away from people and blah, blah, blah," right? And so she got it. She's like, "Oh, okay." But how many kids have wolf biologists as a mom that's going to sit there and explain that to them, right? And so when you fear something and things like this cause that fear, it makes it hard for you to conserve it. And so we don't realize how serious things like this can be, but as a conservationist, I see its effects every day. And so, like I said, this leads to prejudice and hatred of a species that is actually critical to ecosystem health and our health. And so this cultural shift that we went through from agricultural to sedentary or from hunter-gatherer to agriculture, from our folklore, this led to the U.S. Biological Survey, which is now the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, launching a predator control program in the late 1800s. I mean, literally their goal was to wipe out all large carnivores. The thought process back then is that no mountain lions, no bears, no wolves, coyotes would mean hunter's paradise for us. More elk, more deer. And while they were right, the elk and the deer population skyrocketed as they started to decline, have an effect on the population for wolves and mountain lions and bears. What they didn't realize was how that was actually going to hurt the ecosystem. And they were so effective at their job that we actually caused many subspecies of gray wolf to go extinct. And we almost lost the American red wolf and the Mexican wolf. And these myths have perpetuated throughout our culture since. Are wolves going to eat my grandma? Are they going to hurt my livestock? Are they going to decimate the deer and turkey and other things that I like to hunt? And on the other side, you know, for people who want to be able to save wildlife, a lot of people feel like we can't do that. It's too hard. It's too expensive. There's not enough land left. Maybe Fish and Wildlife Service isn't doing their job, which they are. It's too dangerous for the wolves in the wild. And while it is a hard life in the wild, it is definitely possible to save these guys. So with that, where are we today? And specifically with the Mexican wolf, they are a critically endangered species. Brief history of them before we launch into the foster program is they were actually listed under the ESA in 1976. They were so close to extinction that Fish and Wildlife Service sent biologists out to the wild to try and capture some so they could start a breeding program in zoological facilities, and they could only find a handful. They were that close to extinction. So they brought all of those guys into the captive population and launched a breeding program. And they were declared extinct in the wild in 1980. They couldn't find any more. From having none in the wild, with those last few being brought into captivity, they got the program up and were able to breed, up and started, and were able to breed those pairs and grow the population. And in 1998, they were able to launch a recovery and release program in New Mexico and Arizona. And since then, since 1998, 146 wolves have been released. Mexico joined the effort in 2011. And currently we have about 200 Mexican wolves in the wild. Now I know 200 is not great and about as close to extinction as you can get, but it's way better than zero. And we've hit some hiccups along the way in the last 2 decades and have learned a lot. And that's what science is, right? Is learning from our mistakes, from looking at nature, from trying things and seeing what works best. And we're doing some really great innovative programs now that I think are going to help. And we've seen a consistent rise in the population the last several years, which is gives a lot of hope to the wolf biologists that are working on this program. But before I launch into why the foster program, I get this question a lot: is why? Why put all this time and energy, breeding all these animals in the captive program, managing them, trying these release efforts? Why wolves? Why should we care? And it's a very simple answer. Large carnivores play a vital role. They are a keystone species in keeping the ecosystem healthy. And one of the things that I love about them is they are an umbrella species. If you can save wolves, you end up helping a lot of other species of plants and animals. A great example of that is Yellowstone. The gray wolf reintroduction started in 1995, so about 3 years before the Mexican wolf program started. And those biologists really, the big thing was they wanted to bring wolves back to Yellowstone because they were trying to restore species that had been lost. They really wanted to bring nature back to Yellowstone. And when we think of Yellowstone, we think of all these big charismatic animals like bison and elk and mountain lions. But now wolves are synonymous with Yellowstone because according to the Audubon, $35 million a year is spent in people coming just to be able to see wolves. And that ecotourism, the money that goes into those restaurants and guides and hotels and gift shops helps create jobs essentially, and really brings a lot of positive, increases the economy of those areas that surround or are in the park. And so a lot of people don't think of those benefits of it. But again, the biologists that were introducing these animals weren't thinking of all that. They just wanted to bring wolves back and restore something that had been lost. One of the things that my PhD advisor that I had started at Oregon State University, his name was Dr. William Ripple. He's a plant biologist. He was working in the park for decades. And he actually noticed around 2000, he was seeing plants coming back to the park that he hadn't seen in a long time. And he was not just seeing diversity come back, but also an increase in plant populations. And a good example is the picture he took here of the before and after of when wolves were essentially right when wolves were released and about 5 years later. And now he didn't know it was wolves when he first started noticing these changes. He looked at all sorts of things. He looked at climate change, plant disease, seeing if there was any major effects in the area, geological events. He looked at everything, and everything kept bringing him back to about 1995 as seeing that change in those plants. And so he started to realize that it was the wolf coming back. And what happened was when the wolves weren't there, when the mountain lions and the bears weren't there, the elk population skyrocketed. It was over double what the park had historically seen in that area. And basically the carrying capacity of the park was of the elk population was just way surpassed. I mean, they were eating everything down to the dirt. When a tree would fall, no new trees would replace them because the elk were sitting there eating the saplings. They would denude the landscape around the riparian habitat and, from the riparian habitats up throughout the mountains. And when the wolves came back, they didn't decimate the deer population. They just started bringing it back down to that healthy carrying capacity that the park could handle. And on top of that, they actually changed the elk's behavior as well. Having predators back, the elk were more skittish. They would eat a little bit and move on, eat a little bit and move on. When they had lost those predators, elk started to become pretty lazy. They would sit there and eat the grass onto the dirt and then move over a little bit and eat the grass onto the dirt and move over a little bit. And anybody that's gardeners knows that if you prune something all the way down to its roots, it's going to die. Whereas if you prune just a little bit and move on, it's actually very healthy for the plant. So by changing the population and their behavior of the elk, wolves really helped change the landscape. And you can see here just some of the plants starting to come back around the river area right there. And one of the coolest animals that they started to see come back to the park was the beaver. I mentioned earlier that there was a lot of tree loss in the area. As trees would fall down, there weren't any that were replacing it. We all know beavers have to have trees to make their homes. And so beavers really left the park. And when wolves came back, we started to see a change in the ecosystem because beavers started to build their dams, and that made a big difference. And I have to take a second because my outlet is broken and my battery is running low. So hold on one second.
This is a good time just to make a quick reminder that if you have any questions for Regina, please post those in the YouTube chat there. And Yusan and I will ask those questions after Regina finishes. Thank you.
I don't think I've ever had this many technical difficulties in a presentation before. Thank you guys for hanging in there with me. So with that, when the beaver came back, it brought a whole bunch of other species because they created these amazing pools that were habitat for amphibians and endangered species of fish, and bushes came back on the shore that were homes for birds and butterflies. So it was really neat to see the effect that wolves had on the ecosystem. One of the things that we forget to talk about as scientists is they benefit us too. They help reduce disease in ungulates that can either get us sick or can get our livestock sick. They help reduce depredation on crops. I mean, I used to live in farmland, and man, deer just sit there and annihilate soybean and corn crops. They help reduce non-native prey like feral hogs and so on. So we had to think about, as scientists, when we're talking to the public, especially when we're asking them to change their daily routine and potentially take on things that are a little bit harder for them, what the benefits are for them in this. And there are a lot. So that leads to why we do all these amazing, crazy things to try and save different species, because we know that everything has an effect. And wolves specifically, as you can see now, have a really big effect. And that's why I said earlier that they're this umbrella species that by saving them and bringing them back and restoring that landscape and having those large carnivores, you ultimately make the rest of the ecosystem healthy as well. So fostering is one of the coolest techniques that I have ever seen with conservation. Whatever crazy scientist 30 years ago, or not even 30 years ago, I'm sorry, in the early 2000s actually, the Red Wolf program was the first program to ever try fostering. And the scientists that said, you know what, we're gonna try and take itty bitty, teeny tiny potato-sized puppies and sneak them into a wild den so we can sneak some new genetics in there, was probably one of the bravest scientists. And that is one of the things I love about science, is you have to be creative. You have to think outside the box to solve problems. And that's essentially what fostering does, is it's really solving a lot of the problems that we're seeing in wolf conservation. So why do this? The biggest thing is when you're talking about endangered species, you know that your genetic diversity has to be as diverse as possible to give them the best chance at fighting off diseases, of having their offspring survive. And what we were seeing in both the Mexican and the Red Wolf programs is with these critically endangered populations, we had more genetic diversity in the captive program than in the wild program, and with the releases. And so as the releases were successful and we had more adults in the landscape, instead of releasing adults from the captive program, naive animals, who, even though we're keeping them as wild as possible, still have an adjustment period where they have to get used to being out in the wild and learning to hunt and defending their territory. And it works, because we wouldn't have Mexican wolves or red wolves today if it didn't. It is harder. And so if you can sneak these little puppies that have more genetic diversity in them into a wild litter and have wild parents who already know all of those skills and have those skills to raise those puppies as their own and give them the best chance of survival, you really have a great chance of helping to increase the genetic diversity. The other thing is wolves are very territorial. So you may have an entire section of their recovery area that's already occupied by wolves, and their genetic relatedness may be pretty close. And how do you release adults in there when they're very territorial? So you can get new genetics in there. You can't, but if you can sneak puppies in there, you help increase the diversity in areas that are already occupied by wolves. So it's kind of win-win for a lot of reasons. But one of the things that's very surprising is we've had a lot of pushback in those recovery areas from people who do not want us to release wolves at all. There's a lot of anti-wolf sentiment in Arizona and New Mexico. And for some reason, puppies and fosters aren't that big of a deal. They're okay with it, to a degree. And So it's another side of benefit that we did not expect, is having a tolerance from the local communities for doing the pup fosters, which is really exciting. But we also have to look at what are things that are can be concerning. You know, a big one is that you're essentially disturbing a new mom, because we have to do this when the pups are really young, and trying to find ways to keep that disturbance to the minimum possible that it could be, so that mom comes back and takes care of those puppies. And I would say then the biggest concern is logistics, which I'm going to go into in a second. The logistics for this are incredibly challenging. I joke with the Fish and Wildlife Service team all the time of we think fostering is potentially taking some years off of our life because of the stress and the logistics that go into getting these puppies out into the wild. But why does fostering work? I think the number one reason, and one of the reasons that I love wolves so much, is they are very nurturing. Wolf packs, their families mimic ours to a degree. The structure, it's mom and dad and their offspring for multiple years. The older puppies from last year help raise the new puppies, just like your older siblings help raise you. Just like if somebody put a baby wrapped in a blanket on your doorstep, you're going to take care of it. You're going to help find it a home. These guys are very similar. You know, they want to take care of their puppies. Their mothering behavior is so strong that even when we go in and mess with their dens and put new puppies in it, they come back in and they take care of them. And so by seeing that natural behavior of how bonded the moms are to their puppies, that was one of the things that gave scientists the idea of, hey, this could work. And we just started this program. It's pretty new. In 2014, we actually started, we started the very first attempt to foster was U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had an opportunity to foster a wild-to-wild litter. What I mean by that is there was a mom that they had released with a male who's pregnant, an attempt to get a new pack out there, new genetics out there. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The dad broke off and left the mom. And as biologists, we know that you really need at minimum 2 adults to make a pair work, because somebody has to bring food home for the female that's nursing. So they decided to go in and capture the mom and the pups and bring them into captivity and attempt to release her later. And there was a wild litter that gave birth at the same time. And this is something we've been trying to do for a long time. And so they ended up taking advantage of that and brought some of the Mexican wolves from that one wild litter and put them into the other wild litter, and it worked. And that gave us the confidence to move forward with this. I don't know if you heard me mention earlier, but Red Wolves actually started this program in the late 90s, early 2000s. And where Red Wolves are native to is in North Carolina. It's a very nice flat, it is on the coastline. Besides being really thick with vegetation, it's pretty easy to navigate, and it's a very easy place to see litters, see the wolves, be able to foster pretty easy. Mexican wolves don't have that. And the reason that we started fostering so much later with them is because they are in alpine territory, mountainous, 8,000 foot elevation, hard to find dens, hard to get to them, not a lot of roadways. And before the development of the GPS collars, they really couldn't track wolves well enough to find their dens easily. But once GPS collars came into existence and they started using them in this program, it made it easier for them to identify where wolves were locating their dens, which meant that we might be able to foster. And we ever since, we've been doing it ever since 2014. And we've had 50 pups successfully in the last 5 years, which is pretty epic. When I go over the logistics, you'll understand. But one of the neatest things that we've seen is that pups actually have a better survival rate than predicted. And actually, it looks like a better survival rate than even wild pups have. And that may be just because their genetics are healthier. It also means that another reason, which I'll talk about in a little bit, is that the Fish and Wildlife Service is helping these packs by giving them some food caches to help supplement the new pups that have come in to the den. But yeah, so I mean, it's incredible. And I'm really proud of the Endangered Wolf Center specifically. We helped launch this program and we're the first institution to do it. And of the 50, we've fostered over 27 or about 27 pups to the wild. But there's been a lot of institutions that have been able to help with this program, whether supporting it financially or being able to foster pups themselves. So this is definitely a team effort with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the state agencies. But really, the logistics go into this. It is incredible. We do the fostering before the pups turn 14 days old. As you can see in the picture, they're itty bitty. Like I mentioned, they can fit in the palm of your hand. Their eyes aren't open yet. Their ears aren't open yet. They are pretty helpless for those first 2 weeks, really relying on smell to nurse from mom. And because of that, it is a very low stress transfer. I mean, these guys pretty much just sleep the whole time. So it's a really good time to get in there, but it's also, the 2 weeks is important because it's the time that mom is bonding with her pups and really has those strong hormones that are helping her, take care of them and having those mothering instincts. So it's a good time if you're going to ever disturb the den to do it because she has that urge to come back and take care of them. We also need to make sure that the age difference between the pups in the wild and the pups that are in captivity are just a few days because we don't want that a big difference for a couple of reasons. One, we don't want mom to be able to notice, oh, there's this giant puppy in with these little puppies. We want everybody to kind of look the same. But also, if pups are a different size, you may have some pups that don't have as good of advantage of getting to the nipple to get milk. Let's say we get to the den and mom's pups are 2 weeks old and our pups are only 3 days old and really tiny. The wild pups are going to outmaneuver those captive pups. So we really want everybody to be about the same age. But what this means is that we basically have just a few days to schedule this to make it all happen. And what I mean by that is I talked about the GPS collars earlier. The way that scientists can tell that wolves have denned is because wolves don't ever stay in one place for very long. The only time that we see wolves stay in one place is either because they just caught dinner and it takes them a week to get through an elk and they'll stay near it in kind of one spot. And so when that GPS collar is taking coordinates, it sends a signal up to the satellite and pinpoints a spot on the map. And if there's a whole bunch of spots in one place, that's called a cluster. And if you see a cluster, essentially that wolf is staying still for some reason. And it's either because they caught dinner or because they've denned and had puppies, which they only have pups one time a year in the spring. So we know if it's in the April, May time period that it's a very good chance that it's puppies, or it's because they've died. Those are really the only three reasons that wolves stay in one place. Otherwise, they are constantly around their territory, checking it, looking for food, moving throughout, protecting it. So based on those clusters and what time of year it is, they can start to, the biologists can start to pinpoint, okay, I think this is a female that's just, or I think this is they know it's a female based on the collar, but I think that she's denning because of the time of the year. They'll send scientists out to see if they see any signs that it was dinner versus a litter being born, but they don't want to get so close to the den site that they disturb the mom. So they have to use spotting scopes and look from far away and see if they see any signs of, say, vultures in the area, or if it's a clear area, maybe they can actually see the wolves eating if it is an elk that they've taken down. If they don't see any of those signs, it's a really good chance that it's that mom has given birth and she's staying in that location because she's got puppies. Once they see that, that's when they come back to the captive population and captive program and say, okay, we have a litter in the wild, we think. But it takes days for that pattern to show up of clustering, right? So you're waiting for maybe a week to see that pattern. And remember, we have to do this before they're 14 years old. So now we've just lost 7 days waiting for that data from the collar to come in. So really we have maybe a week after that to schedule this. And there's things that we have to look at to be able to see if we can. On the captive side of things, we have to make sure that our litter is big enough to donate some puppies to. We always want to keep some in the captive program so that we can keep the genetics and the captive population healthy. So the litter has to be at least 4 puppies. We don't usually send puppies by themselves. So we always want to send at least 2 so they can snuggle with each other on the way down to their new home and keep each other warm. So they have to have at least 4 pups. Average litter size in the captive program or with Mexican wolves in general is about 5 puppies. We've had some pretty big litters the last few years, 7, 8, 9 puppies, but not always. And so we have to check the captive litter, make sure it's big enough. At the Endangered Wolf Center, the way that we do that is we actually have cameras in the den, and we can watch mom give birth and count how many puppies she has. And we relay that information right away to the Fish and Wildlife Service so that they know there's a potential litter to match up. On the flip side of that, the wild litters need to be small enough to handle puppies coming in. We don't want to overburden mom. The whole point of this is for our pups to go into the wild to be able to survive. And if she's got too many puppies, they won't get enough milk. They won't be have enough nutrition to grow and be healthy. So if we get to, once we decide to go ahead and foster, once we get to the litter in the wild, we brought our puppies. What we do to manage the litters in the wild is if she happens to have a large litter, we don't give her more than 8 puppies. So let's say we've brought 2 puppies, and let's say she's had a litter of 8. We will put our 2 puppies in, and we will take 2 wild puppies out and bring them back to our facility and foster them into our litter that we just took puppies from. And that's called cross fostering. What's neat about that is it's true genetic mixing between the 2 populations, which, as you guys know, is really important for population health. But we try not to do that. We don't want to take any puppies from the wild if we can. So where we can, we will give her 8 to 9 puppies at the most. And unless we have to, we don't take any back with us. And we've had to a few times, but only a few times. So that's been really good. The other issues with timing is the den location in a place that we can actually get to? Has this pack had puppies before? If they're first time breeders, we may decide not to disturb them this year, give them a chance to have puppies so those pups can survive, just in case us disturbing them has any negative effects. We haven't seen that yet, but we're very careful, with those decisions. Then there's weather. And we had one year where we had to cancel a foster event because a wildfire went through. And there was another litter that popped up pretty soon after that wildfire that had gone through, and the weather ended up, the wildfire was gone. So great, we could do the fostering, except for that huge high winds came through, and all of these trees that had just been burned to a crisp now were falling constantly, and it was too dangerous for people to hike in. So weather plays a huge role in it. And then travel. Can we travel? Can we get, most of the locations of the zoological institutions are pretty far away from the recovery area, and they have to fly the puppies there. Do we have the ability to fly? So those are all things that go into it logistically. And it's this entire team right here that works on those logistics. I mean, when I say it's a team effort, I am not kidding. It is 50 institutions within the captive side of things, working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Arizona Game and Fish, New Mexico Game and Fish Department, the Forest Service. I mean, we work with Native American nations. So it is an incredible team effort, and I'm so grateful to be able to work with these guys. But one of the people that I really have to say that really manages this is Susan Dix. Dr. Susan Dix is the veterinarian for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and she is, we nicknamed her the Wolf Mom or Pup Whisperer. She is the one that helped really launch this program and get it going, and getting these all these different institutions on board. So a special shout out to her. But to be able to handle all those logistics I just talked to, it takes a lot of planning. I mean, we literally start a year beforehand on which animals are going to breed that year, creating a spreadsheet so that we can put on, the spreadsheet of when did they breed, when are they due. We're communicating constantly with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about that. We're, on the captive side, we're preparing the habitats that the wolves live in at our facilities, making sure that it's a great space for those moms so that they're successful having puppies. We're purchasing equipment and training staff. So there's a lot that goes into it, a lot of preparation and a lot of money. This is just an example, all the different things that we have to purchase, from tickets to the equipment to staff time to be able to make sure that we can do this successfully and just the right way. The other fun thing that we do that any of you guys could be part of if you're in the St. Louis area and want to is we do breeding observations. Remember I said that we keep track of when our wolves breed. We know that gestation for wolves is about 60 to 63 days. So if we see our mated pair breed, we can tell Fish and Wildlife Service, okay, this pair bred this date in February, their due date's roughly around April 15th. Keep track of that. And if you see wild litters that are going into labor about that or having puppies around that same time, ours may match up. And our observers, God love them, are willing to stand in freezing cold temperatures for 2 hours, January to March, to watch our breeding pairs. It's great experience doing scientific observational data recording. And it's really important to conservation efforts. So if any of you guys are interested in that, please reach out. So then once we know we have a litter, like I said, we will check the dens. We are lucky enough to be able to do that through cameras, but some institutions don't have cameras, so they may go in really quickly, just check the den. Most dens are artificial. They can lift a lid and see inside how many puppies they have. We really don't disturb them at all. We just make sure that they're healthy and that there's enough puppies. This is one of the litters at the Endangered Wolf Center. But it's not always that easy. So this was a nice artificial den that was a box that had a hole in it that the wolf went into and gave birth in. You could lift a lid and go into it. But at places like our center that are have very big enclosures and very natural enclosures, sometimes the wolves decide to dig their own dens, which we allow them to do. We want them to practice as much natural behavior as possible. But it can be pretty challenging. And I thought I'd share a fun video with you guys of how tough it can be to get puppies out of a den. This is our animal care staff at the Endangered Wolf Center. This is actually a red wolf litter. And a female gave birth. She dug this den the night before. She stayed in here for a couple of weeks, and when the puppies were about 6 weeks old, we went in to do a health check and give them their first round of vaccinations. And it was not an easy den to get into. And I need to make sure when I hire people that I ask them if they're claustrophobic because you have to be comfortable going in. And that is one of our red wolf puppies that she was getting out. Now, when we foster, the puppies are much younger than this, but you can see how tough it can be to go in and get those puppies. And especially because a lot of times we're leaving at like 3 in the morning so that we can make it down to the recovery area with fostering with enough daylight to be able to find the wild den. So trying to go do that in the middle of the night can be challenging, but we have a really good, very talented staff. So on the captive side, we're checking the dens. On the wild side, they're doing the same thing. They're constantly monitoring the packs, checking those collars for data, checking trail cameras. And like I said, getting visuals. You can see in the bottom picture, sometimes they can take a spotting scope and see some cleared areas from pretty far away and tell if a pack has denned without disturbing them. But once we know that they match up, that the GPS collars are showing that the mom's denned in the wild and we have a big enough litter in the captive program, it is go time. And I mean, go time is, it is like our motto, like, all right, let's do this. So we take the pups as close to departure as possible. We want them to stay with the mom as long as possible. We want to handle them the least amount possible. So if our flight is at 5 a.m. and it's a commercial flight, we have to be there an hour beforehand at 4 o'clock. We are pulling these puppies at like 4:15 and leaving our center at like 4:40. We do a quick health check on them, maybe give them some fluids if we need to. We whiz them, which just means that we help them go to the bathroom. When they're really little like this, mom actually helps them go to the bathroom by licking their genitalia. And when she does that, she's cleaning it up. At the same time, she's cleaning up the urine or eating the feces. And there's several reasons that we think they do that. It helps keep the den clean, keeps scent down so that predators can't find the den, and it helps keep flies and other parasites away from the den, reduces disease for the puppies. So we do all that. We may give them a microchip. We usually give them a microchip before we leave the center, and that's one of the ways that we can track them after they've been put into the wild litter to see if they've survived. If Fish and Wildlife Service get hands-on adult pup or adults later in life, they can check the microchip and see if it's one of the ones that was fostered. And then we do a blood draw to help make sure that we know the genetics of the pups that go out into the wild, and we keep track of all of that. So this is an example of us doing health exam. We weigh them really quick. We give them their fluids, make sure they look healthy so that we know that we're choosing the best pups to go out into the wild. They've got a good fighting chance. And luckily all the pups in the captive program are healthy. I mean, they've got parents that have food constantly and are vaccinated. And so they're coming from a really good, healthy pack. And then we leave. Our transport options are either flying commercial. When we do that, we need a minimum of at least 2 people going. If it's a facility that's close, which there are a few, you can drive, or there's the option of a private plane. The tough thing with commercial this year was COVID. And honestly, we actually thought we weren't going to be able to foster at all this year because we didn't want to put any humans at risk flying commercially. Plus, a lot of flights were being canceled. And we had to know that our flight was going to make it. But we were very lucky to have an organization and some individual donors step up and donate their private planes to fly us. So we're really lucky to have that. The whole time that we have these puppies, we are reducing any scent transfer. We wear gloves when we handle them. We wear long sleeves when we're handling them. We don't touch them unless we have to. And when we're traveling, especially commercially, we're very incognito because everybody's very interested in puppies and will want to see them and touch them. And we want to make sure they're, scent free and get to sleep the whole way and make it as comfortable as possible. Oh, and like I mentioned, Lighthawk Conservation Organization was able to donate flights this year. And actually for the St. Louis folks, we actually had one of the owners of the St. Louis Blues step up and donate his private plane to help fly some of the pups from the Endangered Wolf Center specifically. So if that hadn't happened, we probably wouldn't have fostered this year. While we're flying with them, our job is to make sure that they are fed. When they're pups that little, they're eating every 3 hours or so, and it can take us anywhere from 4 to 8 hours to travel to the recovery area, which is why we leave so early in the morning. And so we tube feed them along the way just to make sure that they have food. A lot of people ask me if we bottle feed, and we don't. The bottles, if anybody's ever bottle fed anything, the first couple days are so hard. They're used to mom's nipple and bottles aren't the same. So they fight it and they get formula all over them and then they smell, and we're trying to reduce smell. And it takes a long time to bottle feed. And we've fostered up to 6 puppies at a time before, and trying to bottle feed 6 puppies is not easy. So we tube feed, which just means that we put a tube down their throat, right into their stomach. And they quickly get some food, and you can totally tell when the food hits their stomach because they like relax and they're like, oh, that's what I was looking for. The other thing is that we need to keep them warm. They're always snuggled up with mom and each other, and they usually, that's about a 70, 75 degree temperature. And when you're on cold plains, we have to make sure that they stay warm. So we sneak some hand warmers, like if you go skiing and put hand warmers in your gloves, we put those in a towel in one corner of the carrying crate that we have so they stay warm, and then we whiz. So really quick, I'm going to show you just the cuteness. It'll play. This is what they do the whole time on the flight. I can hear you guys saying aw from there. Like I said, their eyes are closed, their ears are closed. This is pretty not stressful for them. So once we get off the plane, sorry about that. Once we get off the plane, oftentimes we have to travel some more. We have to either, if we land in Arizona, we usually take a small plane like you guys see up here the rest of the way to the recovery area. Or if we fly into Albuquerque, we drive. It's another, couple hours to get to the recovery area, which is right on the border of New Mexico and Arizona, in the Gila or Apache National Forest area. So it's a lot of traveling. And then once we get to the recovery area, we travel some more. We actually travel through via hiking at that point. And it's pretty tough terrain. I mentioned earlier, it's 8,000 feet elevation, and it's up and down the sides of mountains. And from somebody who's from St. Louis, which I think it's like 400 feet elevation here, I mean, you walk 10 steps and you feel like you just ran a marathon. It's really challenging. But it is totally worth it for these guys. I remember one of the hikes that we went on, it was probably 8 miles round trip. And I mean, literally up and down the sides of mountains. You can see, this probably doesn't do it justice of how steep it can be in some areas. But on the way to the den that time, when it was 4 miles over rough terrain, it was great because I had the puppies. They were motivating me, because every once in a while you hear it go, and you're like, all right, puppies, I am going to do this for you. But once you put the pups in the den and you're hiking back, really the only motivation at that point is survival. So, because you got to get back to your car. And it was funny because one of the times, that time, Fish and Wildlife Service, when they were hiking back with us, I had told them the motivation of the puppies. And that I didn't have it anymore. And so they were joking with me, and every once in a while they'd start whining and whimpering to pretend like they were puppies so that I could make it back to the car. But you guys can see the little pup in the carrying crate. We just literally carry him right on our backs, keep him warm the whole time, and look for the den. And we use the GPS coordinates from the collars to help us guide close to the den. But once we're there, we still have to find the den. And you can see how hard it is to see these itty bitty tiny puppies and all of this. So when we find the den, it is very, very exciting. And once we're at the den, we do a quick health check of the pups that are in the wild, and then we give them microchips as well, so that we can tell them apart in later dates. We do a blood draw from the wild pups, helps us look at their lineage and their parents, and just gives more data for the Fish and Wildlife Service. We record weight and sex, all things are important. And then we also take genetic swabs. So we have switched from doing a blood draw to doing cheap swabs, which is a lot easier on tiny, tiny puppies. So that's what I'm doing in that one photo. And one of the cool things that we do to help kind of sneak the pups in there is we make everybody smell the same. What that means is once we're all done with the health checks, we put the wild pups and the captive pups together and we whiz them. And we actually whiz them on each other so that it helps them smell the same. And we'll also pick up dirt from the wild den and rub it on the captive. And in that dirt is mom's fur and the pup smell and all that stuff. So we'll rub it on the captive puppies to help them blend in. So when mom's comes back to the den, she, maybe a little less obvious that she's got new puppies. After that, we get out of there as fast as we can. Our whole goal is to disturb the den the least amount as we possibly can. So we're very careful not to leave our scent. We put a tarp down. All of our clothes are washed in non-scented detergent. We wear hats so that we don't, our hair doesn't shed out. I mean, like, we go to extreme lengths to make sure that we don't disturb the den site. And we get in and out as fast as possible. It usually takes us maybe 20 minutes at the den to do all the stuff I just mentioned. And then after we leave, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the support of the Interagency Field Team, which is what IFT means, which is all that group that I talked about earlier, the state agencies, the Native American nations, the Forest Service, they do work to help support those packs that just had pups fostered to them. And what they do is they actually cache food within a mile of the den, which means if somebody hit an elk with their car, these guys will drag it out to the woods in that area so that they've got an extra food source. So it can help them get past those first few weeks where we've put extra mouths in there to feed. Kind of helps ensure that those pups survive, helps ensure that that pack doesn't turn to maybe depredating on cattle, and helps take care of those puppies that we just put out there. It is pretty rare for for wolves to depredate on cattle, but where we see it increase the most is when it is pup season, because it's harder for them to search for prey because they're stuck in one location with their puppies. So this is one way that Fish and Wildlife Service helps the ranchers in that area make sure that they don't have any extra burden either. And we do all of that so that they can call this home. And it is so worth it to know that these guys get to grow up in the wild and run free, and that the song of the wolf is heard throughout the Arizona, New Mexico wilderness again. It's a pretty special program to be a part of, and we're very lucky to be able to do it. I'm not going to play this because we're out of time, but if you guys look up, Nat Geo did a small feature on our foster efforts. If you just Google National Geographic Mexican Wolf Foster, you'll find it. But one last thank you round really quick. This is the staff that's helped do the fosters at the center. I just realized by looking at this is very female dominated. Actually, it's all women. We are an amazing family at the center, and very lucky to have the people that we work with. And like I said, this is very challenging to do. I mean, the guys who are fostering are up for about 48 hours straight. They're pretty stressed the whole time because they want to take care of these animals, make sure they're safe, and they get to their new home. It looks like it's a lot of fun, but it is really, really hard work. And really lucky to have the guys that are willing to do it, because you pretty much sleep for like 4 days after this is done to recoup from it. And then we do another foster in a week after that if we have another litter. So thank you to all those guys for taking care of these little ones. And then thank you to all the folks who have supported this effort. Again, we're very lucky to have support. It's pretty expensive for a small institution like us to do, and we couldn't do it without them. And we also have donors that step up to help us cover the cost of vaccinations and care and cost of flights and all that stuff. And they actually get to name the puppies before they go out too. So it's a really special program to be a part of. So with that, you guys can help just by being here today. Share the information. Wolves are not the big scary animals you see on TV. The Mexican wolf, for example, has never hurt a human in recorded history. You know, they get a bad rap, and you sharing that information will help reduce that fear and will help push conservation forward. So be an ambassador for these guys. And you can also help centers like ours by donating or volunteering. But one of the biggest things, and is very important right now to say, is that writing your representatives and voting make a huge difference. Writing your representatives to tell them to support programs like the Endangered Species Act, to support the Clean Water Act, to support environmental and climate change legislation. They hear you. I used to be cynical and think that they didn't, but I've had to go to Capitol Hill and advocate for wolves and talk to senators and congressmen, and they actually hear us. They tell us about their constituents who have written in, and your voice will be heard. Please vote in November. It makes all the difference. So with that, let me know if you guys have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Regina, for a really wonderful talk. It's truly amazing to see like how much effort is behind these cross-fostering efforts. So we do have a lot of questions that we might only have time for like 2. So first we have a question from Mike Moore. Are there noticeable differences in vegetation between an endangered wolf center where there are wolves and compared to areas on Tyson grounds where there are presumably no wolves?
A good question. I mean, obviously Missouri to Arizona, New Mexico is a different landscape for vegetation and altitude and weather and all of that stuff. But it's pretty cool. It's pretty close in the fact that it's seasonal, and we get snow, they get snow. We have hot days, they have hot days. But yes, in Missouri in general, we definitely see the difference between landscapes that don't have wolves versus landscapes like in Yellowstone that do. If you guys ever go hiking, you can kind of see a perfect browse line through a lot of the woods in Missouri because there are just so many deer, and there's not a lot of foliage in the understory because of that. So yeah, a lot of big differences. Great question.
Excellent. So wonderful talk. Thanks so much, Regina. We're going to probably, this will be our last question. Before I ask it, I do want to remind people that we will have our reception/happy hour at 5:05 until 5:30. So if your question's not asked, please join us in that. Angela sent out a link to everyone, so you should be able to get that on Zoom, and you can talk to Regina more during that time. So our final question for the evening will actually be two questions. I'm going to try to do them together. So this is about when you go out and actually put the pups in the den. Where are the parents when you put them in, right? When you put the new pups in? And also, what's the success rate of these new pups that you reintroduce into the den? Do they get rejected by the parents?
Great question. We have not seen a rejection yet. And actually, we're actually able to see the moment of foster. And those few that we've had to bring back to captivity, we put them in to our dens in the captive program, and we can watch via the den camera how mom reacts to them. And that's a good indication of how wild moms react. And we have not had rejections that we have seen yet. And we have had several of the foster pups that we have put in grow to adulthood and become alphas of their own packs and have puppies and get their genetics out there, which is the whole point. So this program has actually been very successful because of that. And the wild moms, you guys, I'm a broken record. Wolves are scared of people. When they see people, they run away. And they do the same thing with their dens, their puppies. Now, if that doesn't show you enough of how not afraid of wolves you have to be, you're going up to their den with their babies in it and the mom takes off. Now, we can tell from their GPS collars that they usually stay within a mile or so, sometimes within 100 yards. Sometimes we can hear mom howling in the distance, trying to scare us away or distract us if we're a predator to go after her versus the pups. So that's why we get in and out as fast as we can, because we want her to come back. When she comes back, she cleans all that yucky human scent off of them. But I have seen that over and over again from, whether it's litters with the Mexican wolf, or when I worked in Yellowstone, we would have to go up to the bison or the elk that they just killed and take samples from it to figure out why they chose that particular animal to kill. And I mean, they just risk their life. If you've ever gone up against a bison, which I have not and hope I never do, it is a scary thing. And I have literally watched wolves get flung 20 feet in the air because a bison kicked them. And you think that once they get this, they would defend it with all of their life. But nope, when they see people coming, they take off. As soon as we get our samples, we're out of there, they come back and they'll finish eating it. But that is how scared of people are, of people that wolves are. And I think that's a really important point to share with people, because it just goes to show that it's something that wolves are definitely something on the landscape that we can coexist with. And there's some creative science out there right now, and scientists and ranchers working together to create ways to coexist on the landscape with large carnivores that is just so innovative and gives me so much hope that we can save these animals, and programs like this do too. So, and I'm sorry, I just have to say really quick, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties today. I've never had that happen before, and I know that ate away some of the time and distracted me a little bit, but I can't wait to meet you guys in the after hour party. And I'd love to answer your questions there.
Hey, thank you, Regina. And thanks everyone for coming, and hope to see you at the happy hour. Yay, all right. The string is